So if you were to take out your phone right now and search for flooding, you'd be practically guaranteed to find something that happened 2 weeks ago. In fact, you'd be very likely to find something that happened this week, and surprisingly likely to find something that's literally happening right now. Whether you're in Miami, or you're in Mumbai, or in Malaga, flooding is coming for all of the letters of the ABCs. Unfortunately, it happens so often you can alliterate. It's a massive problem. It's one of the deadliest and most costly disasters that we have out there. And naturally, the focus, justifiably, is on the sort of terrible loss of human life, the unnecessary loss of human life, and economic damages that are so high you can count them as percentages of GDP. One of the things we don't talk as much about, though, are the environmental impacts. Because it turns out this landscape that we've constructed, a lot of these pollutants and other things build up, and when it rains, all this stuff washes off downstream. And it leads to the kind of environmental consequences and pictures, to make third graders run home and say, oh my God, Mom, we got to do something about this, right? The infrastructure that we've built to cope with this is old. In fact, it's so old, it's exploding. Underneath our feet are, even in the smallest communities across the world, hundreds of miles of hidden infrastructure whose sole purpose is to just wash away all the stuff when it rains. And that creates a number of issues, and we can see they start in your neighborhood. When you're walking down the street and you walk by that gutter that we usually just take our eyes off, this leads to pipes that become progressively bigger and bigger, and depending on which city you live in, they could be some of the largest constructed infrastructure projects in the world. This is the kind of stuff that made me want to be an engineer. And this stuff is stubbornly expensive, as you can kind of guess by the looks of this. And it's also stubbornly unseen. We don't measure it, so we actually have no clue what's happening. So when it's about to rain, we're oftentimes wondering, how bad is it going to get? Right? Like, how bad is it going to get? And beyond being stubbornly unseen, it's also stubbornly static. We can't do much about it once it's already started. So it leaves us just kind of staring at it and hoping that it doesn't get as bad as it got last time. And then finally, when the floodwaters subside, it's really stubbornly inaccessible. Then we finally have that moment, after the flood subsides, and we think, what's going to change next time? How's it going to be different? Given the tools that we have available, what can we actually do? And so the question now in the context of AI becomes, is there a role for these emerging technologies? So just like a self-driving car changes its course based on what it's measuring, could we use this as a motivation to see what water systems of the future would look like? And the answer is we can indeed imagine something analogous like that. We can imagine cities that are covered by sensors. These sensors measure water flows, water levels, soil moisture, rainfall, you name it. And then in response to those measurements, they're adjusting, dynamically adapting, no longer just letting the water run downhill like we teach in class, but instead doing something about it. And it turns out that this paradigm is already being adopted. So for example, as we speak, managers in cities like New Orleans are investing into sensor networks that actually give you insight as to what's happening, right? They're making that unseen finally visible. And the devices they're investing into are really innovative in the sense that it used to take a master's or a PhD degree to measure water. Now we have devices that anybody with a screwdriver can pop in, start measuring flooding, for example, and then if something goes wrong, the new device comes in the mail and you just swap it out. And this allows you to sort of measure infrastructure finally at scale. Some really, really large sensor networks that generate a ton of data, which actually creates our second problem. What do you do with all this data? Right? So now that we made it easy to make measurements, what can we do with it? And unfortunately, in this era of predictions, we can do a lot with it. We can take this raw sensor data and turn it into forecasts, for example. So there's a tremendous amount of research out there that shows that if you can predict a flood, let's say at the neighborhood level, 24 hours ahead of time, just heads up, you can save 30% in damage. So to put that in perspective, a flood in Detroit, which doesn't get talked about of flooding a lot, but it still has a lot of flooding, was $1 billion. So just a sensor network with some predictions that lets you know, hey, move your car to higher ground, move your belongings to higher ground can have profound implications, let alone in disaster response and other kind of real-time scenarios. So that's just a measurement. That's what we can do before a flood. While it's flooding, it turns out you can actually do a lot as well. So instead of just letting infrastructure be static, we can go to existing infrastructure assets, if you will, like this detention basin, and retrofit it with internet-connected valves and pumps and gates that say, I will control the flow of this water to no longer do what it used to do, which means I can close a valve, let the water percolate into the ground, get treated. More so than that, not let it go downstream when it's going to go cause flooding if there's no downstream capacity. So there's a number of studies that have shown just at the neighborhood scale, you can hold back water and dynamically move it through a city and squeeze more performance out of your infrastructure. So the simple example is it's raining a lot over in this part of town, it's not raining a lot over here, therefore I can close this valve and hold back this water. And so there's been a number of studies done, and just in conclusion, what they're showing is that you can really get a lot more out of your infrastructure. So infrastructure that's retrofitted with sensors and controllers and analytics acts as if it's twice as big as static infrastructure. So to put that in context, if you're going to build something you can build it at half the size. And that has tremendous costs that are associated with it. So these digital upgrades can be 2, 3, 4 times as effective as the static assets at a fraction of cost, as you can kind of imagine. And this doesn't just work at the neighborhood scale, it also works at the city scale. So we can go to some of the largest sewer systems in the world, serving millions of people, and say, if you have sensors that are telling you what's going on, can you control something? And what can you control? Well, it turns out when you get really big, like a 30-foot sewer pipe, you get these big inflatable pillows that you can press a button on. And what they do is they basically serve like a little dam underneath the ground that you might not even know exists, holding back that water. And the impacts of this are massive. Just by reprogramming this infrastructure, turning the pumps on and off at different times, opening gates and valves, you can achieve the equivalent of billions of dollars of infrastructure investments, because these big pipes underground are truly billions of dollars of expense. So again, it's one of those, before you dig, you might want to call and see if you can get more out of what you have. And so utilities across the world are starting to invest into this. They're turning to digital solutions as a part of a balanced portfolio for resilience. And it turns out you can scale even bigger than this. So some of these initial studies are now showing us, hey, what else can we control? How big can we go? You can go to the scale of entire river basins. So take a watershed that's 1,000 square miles. It might have a bunch of dams in it, and historically we think of dams as liabilities, right? People just release water and it flushes out fish, causes flooding. By going into these river basins and retrofitting them with these devices that actually tell you what's going on, you can start almost modulating the river to behave as if it was natural. So you take these things that we think about traditionally as liabilities and you turn them into assets. So you can create river conditions that are amenable to ecosystems while simultaneously serving the people that live along those lines. So that's during a flood. And then when the floodwaters wash away, you can still do a lot of cool stuff with this data. So all this information that you've collected, all these lessons you've learned during these events, you can use them to calibrate basically digital representations of the cities that we live in. And you can bring to bear everybody's knowledge, not just the planners and the engineers that traditionally build these systems, but residents. By making it easy to use, like a video game, interactivity, you can allow people to sort of say, this is my vision for the city, and you can play around, but get the assurance that the results that you're getting are as good as the best science that we have available. And so we're really getting into an era now where these digital models of cities are almost like video games that everybody can contribute to and be able to sort of pitch their vision for the future. So with that in mind, it's kind of a really exciting time for this area. There's clearly a lot of potential for these digital solutions to impact how we manage floods before, during, as well as after. I will say, though, that the water sector has not gotten nearly as much love from the tech community as maybe some other sectors like transportation and energy, and that's okay. But y'all are welcome to join. It's a really exciting area. The one thing we're learning from discussions that we're having with water managers is that they're super excited. They're incredibly excited about the potential of technology, but it's new stuff. A lot of them see AI as maybe expensive, it's rapidly evolving. They see themselves as not having that expertise to maybe use this, but they're still open to it. And so that means we just have to have a bunch of conversations to really see what their needs are and how to take the stuff that's clearly useful and turn it into something usable. And I hope you all have those conversations with them. Thanks.